we offer consultations. We offer peer support groups, webinars, trainings, videos, and other resources. And we are a family partner to the Virginia Tiered System of Support, which is a VDOE, Virginia Department of Education project. And if you need certificates of attendance for this evening, we will ask that you email Stacia Stribling at staciastribling@formfamiliesforward.org. And that information will be in the link in the chat. All right. So a few things that we do have going on at Form Families Forward is we are currently doing 2 support groups. We do a virtual support group on the first Sunday of each month from 7:30 to 9. And then we also do an in-person support group on the 3rd Wednesday of each month from 7 to 8:30. And that's held at our office in Fairfax County. And these are all led by Forum Families Forward staff, and it's just a really great group of people that are just there to support each other and to help navigate this crazy world that we live in with our adoptive, foster, and kinship families. We also have some upcoming opportunities. There's going to be a program called Bridge to the Future, and it's going to be a workshop for young adults, and that's going to be held in Loudoun County. So again, in your chat, there will be a link for more information about that, but it's going to be an adult workshop kind of talking about things that they can do to look ahead to their future. And then if you haven't already explored our website, we also have a Learning Your Way online courses that you can go through. And there are some great courses that you can do for special education, trauma, other health impairments, and other courses that are in there. And those also, as you become a foster parent, or if you are a foster parent or caregiver, you can use those for certification hours too. So that's always good to know. And then we're also getting ready to do a family data leader training in June. So if you are a parent or caregiver for a child birth to 5 that is eligible for special education, we would love to have you join us. It's a 4-week learning series, and it's designed to build the capacity of family members to participate in important data discussions that can help your school, your child, the school district, and even the state of Virginia. So you'll be learning all sorts of great things to help children with disabilities and learning all about the fun data stuff with that. And again, if you haven't checked out our website, we have an amazing resource directory. As a parent, I use it all the time. And as a staff person, I use it all the time too, just finding all these great resources as far as this part of the resource directory that we're showing here has well, yeah, I guess it has both of these here. Sorry. So there's the topics, so you can read articles and find web pages and all sorts of things. Pretty much anything adoptive, foster care, special education, kinship, all of that is on the website. And then we also have a directory of local people that can help support you as far as therapists and family support people, pediatricians, even legal people, all of that you can sort. You can look on that resource directory, and then you can sort by insurance. You can sort if they're trauma informed, which area that you live in. You can sort it by there. So it's lots of great things there. So please check out our resource directory. And we would like to welcome you to our webinar here. And again, as I said, it's the who, what, when, where, and why of foster care in Virginia. And one of the things that we wanted to do was just to be here to answer some of your questions that you might have about foster care. So the first thing we're going to do is just kind of have talk about the basics of foster care in Virginia, just the main things that everybody needs to know going in, and then some questions that we've gotten from people out in the world. And then we'll also have time at the end to do audience questions. So you can either unmute yourself and ask questions, or you're more than welcome to put the questions in the chat as you go so you don't forget the questions. And we have somebody monitoring that, so we can do that. All right. Oh, so actually, before we begin with the acronyms, we are going to take a minute to introduce ourselves. So my name is Melissa Lebling, and I am the Family Support and Outreach Specialist for Foreign Families Forward. I've been working here since September. Before I worked here, my career was in early childhood education. And my husband and I were foster parents through Fauquier County DSS from I wrote that down so I wouldn't forget. So from 2013 to 2022, we had 16 different children, foster parent kids through our house, besides some respite kids that we helped also. So we had 15 different children and 4 we ended up adopting. So we have 3 biological adult children who live out of the home, and then we have 4 children that we have adopted through foster care that live with us. And we have 2 teenage twin girls, and then we also have a 6 and a 7-year-old. So life is busy, life is fun. So, and I would also like to introduce you to Shawn Nashwinter. And if you want to just introduce yourself real quick, Shawn.
Oh, thanks. Hi, my name is Shawn Nashwinter, and I have been a local Department of Social Services worker. I was doing that for 40 years prior to retiring in 2021. So from 1981 to 2021, I worked in a local public Department of Social Service agency. And I started out as a child protective service worker. And then I moved into being a foster care worker for a number of years. And then I finished out as the adoption worker at Fauquier DSS for probably the last 15 years that I worked. So I've kind of worked in all of those areas during my career.
All right. And we're very excited to have you with us. So before we get actually started with everything, we're going to kind of go over just a few acronyms that you might hear tonight, just so that you could understand what we're talking about. So we have a list of acronyms. There we go. So if you hear DSS, that is the Department of Social Services. And if you hear LDSS, that would be the local Department of Social Services. There's also VDSS, which is Virginia Department of Social Services. You also might hear some things if we talk about court or anything like that. You might hear about a CASA or a GAL. And a CASA is a court-appointed special advocate. And the guardian ad litem, which is a GAL, is just the lawyer that is assigned to help. Both of them are CASA and the GAL are there to help support the children. And then a CPS worker is a child protective services worker. ICPC was an interstate compact placement of children, and that's something that if you if that would be between 2 states. If you just found a child that needed to have care in another state, you would have to do an ICPC. TFC is a therapeutic foster care, and I don't know how much, if Shawn's going to get a lot into that tonight, but that would just be a different level than just the common foster care parent. TPR is a termination of parental rights. A VMAT is the Virginia Enhancement Maintenance Assessment Tool. So if your child has some special needs, you could go ahead and ask your worker about that. And then, of course, an IEP is an individual education program. So those are just some buzzwords you might hear tonight. So we just want to make sure everybody was on the same page. So I'm going to turn this over to Shawn, and she's going to do a good introduction to foster care in Virginia. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, you guys. So I have a tendency to talk pretty quickly, so I'm going to try to pace myself so that I'm not flying through this information. So I thought that the first thing that we should just start out with is just what foster care is. And I've always thought of foster care as a service. It keeps children safe when they can't remain with their biological families because of abuse and neglect. But it's also part of an array of services that can be offered to families and children in a community, so that maybe abuse and neglect can be prevented, and therefore out of home placement can be prevented. The thing to remember about foster care placement when children are separated is that it's meant to be temporary. It's not a long-term solution to the problems that exist in a family. But it's a good temporary measure while families are trying to work to have the children return to their care. In order to remove a child in Virginia and probably most other states, the child has to be in what's considered imminent danger and imminent danger to their life or health. And the separation of the child from the family has to be a last resort. So in other words, the agency has to try all the other things possible to prevent that removal before it happens. And so if we know the family, if the DSS worker knows the family and has had some opportunity to work with them prior to the separation, then a lot of those foster care services have already been attempted with the family and have not been able to prevent the removal. And so then after the removal, then more of those services, they would reconvene and try to figure out what services then would be appropriate for the family to try to help them get the child returned. So once a child is placed in foster care, the foster parents considered part of a team of people that try to do that rehabilitation and get that child placed back with the family. And the goal would be to try to achieve permanency, try to achieve reunification or some other permanent goal within a period of time. And so you'll hear, if you become a foster parent, you'll hear the words permanency and teamwork a lot in your interactions with the agency. So I thought it'd be important to mention to you all kinship care. So kinship care is a type of foster care. It's based on a belief that it's just as important to work to avoid separation between a child and a family as it is to work to reunification. But it's also important to make efforts once that separation occurs to try to temper that or soften it some by maybe finding relatives that can take that child and act as a foster care provider. So preference is given to relatives because of that. And so if an agency can locate a family member who's willing to have the child in their home, who's willing to become a foster parent provider, then that is priority over a non-relative home. And fictive kin are also considered, same as relatives. If it's somebody that's not blood related but has a relationship with the child, then that would also be a placement that would be given priority. The thing about kinship care is that the providers, the relatives, have to do the same training and the same approval process as non-relative providers. So they have to be able to meet those same standards as if they were non-relatives. And the difference is there are waivers that are able to be used that can give kinship providers more time to get those requirements completed so that a placement can occur more quickly. And this practice follows something called the Children's Service Practice Model. And so that is used in Virginia, and it's a set of beliefs that include things like children do best when they're raised in their families and best when they can be raised in their biological families. That keeping children and families together and avoiding any kind of separation is the best use of resources. And that when children can't live with their families, that consideration for placement would be first with kinship placement. And then a last part of that is that when placements outside the home occur, that we encourage promotion of family, sibling, and community connections, that those are maintained. So the emphasis is on preserving and strengthening family connections throughout the process. And so you'll see things in practice like things like family partnership meetings. And these are meetings that are held whenever a change in where a child's going to live happen. So they happen at removal, and they happen at if a child's going to go from one foster home to a different foster home because of a variety of reasons, there would have to be a family partnership meeting held at that point. And so foster parents can participate in those, biological family members participate, the workers. There's an array of people that can be included in those conversations. The other things that you'll see that are part of this philosophy are emphasis, again, on using kinship families. And there are court timelines that are set by statute that govern goals in foster care and how quickly that those need to be achieved. And so there are court reviews of the case to see what progress is being made. Because again, foster care is temporary. It's not meant to be a permanent solution. Okay, so now we can talk a little bit about the children that are in foster care. And so the numbers that I have are from last October 2023. And so they might have changed a little bit since then, but they're within the last year. So at that point, there were 5,013 children in foster care in Virginia. And most frequently, those children come in because of some sort of neglect. That is the most frequently reported type of abuse and neglect, not only in Virginia, but across the country. Neglect is by far the largest category of abuse and neglect reported. And so the average stay for the children once they're separated from their families is around 19.62 months, a little over a year and a half. In terms of gender, 50.9%, just over half are boys, and 49.1%, just under half, are girls. 58.4% are Caucasian children, 28.3% African American, 11.9% Hispanic, and then under 2% are children that don't fall into any of those categories, the other categories. Infants, 4.4% were infants, 23% ages 1 to 5, 14.2% ages 6 to 9, 10.7% ages 10 to 12, 31.8% ages 13 to 18, and then 15.9% 19 and over. And those are the children that would be in what's called independent living, and they can remain in a foster care placement and receive foster care services up until the time they're 21 years of age. So you can see from those numbers that there's a wide range of different types of care that we need. And there's, when we're considering placement, we want to be able to have a lot of choice about where children go, because we want to match the children with the families. And so during your approval process, one of the things that the social worker will talk to you about is what are the specifics of children that might be placed in your home. So you can say, I'm better set up for toddlers, or I'm better set up for teens, or, I have 3 boys already. It would probably be better to place a boy with me. You can specify what you have in mind might be good match. And the workers will pay attention to that, although I won't tell you that, if you ask for a boy, they might call you up first and tell you that they have a girl for you. Melissa can testify to that. And so what I always say to families is no is a perfectly acceptable answer. And it doesn't mean that you won't be called again. And I think that, and we're serious when we say that, because we want to minimize the number of placements that children have when they come into foster care. And so if we do really good matching in the beginning, that's one way that we can guarantee that stability in those placements will happen, and we won't need to do a lot of moving of children around from one home to another. Foster care has a very bad reputation for that. And so the more foster homes that we have to choose from in terms of our matching in the very beginning, then the more likely that those placements will not fail. So the message there is we're always hoping for new foster parents. Okay. So let me talk to you a while about foster parent training. So as I've put there in that slide, it's the first step in the approval process. And it gives you the information that you need to make what we call an informed decision about becoming a foster parent. And you'll hear that term informed decision a lot during the training. And it's required that during that training is an approved curriculum. So the state of Virginia's preferred curriculum, although there are several that are approved, the preferred curriculum is referred to as PRIDE, P-R-I-D-E, and it stands for Parent Resources for Information, Development, and Education. And it consists of 5 in-person sessions, 3 hours each, and 4 online sessions that you complete between your in-person sessions. So it's about 27 to 31 hours of training that you complete prior to your approval. And that covers a really wide range of topics. And the in-person sessions and the online sessions kind of cross over a little bit. So you learn about abuse and neglect, you learn about trauma, loss and grief, you learn about teamwork, cultural identity, child development, attachment. There's a session on biological families, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute, and just the mechanics of foster care. So that's what's covered in your training. And the focus of the PRIDE training is on 5 competencies. And those are protecting and nurturing children. In other words, keeping them safe. Safety is assessed at every point along the way. Helping them heal. So protecting and nurturing, first competency. Second one is meeting developmental needs and addressing developmental delays. And what you'll learn in your training is that it's very common for children in foster care to be behind developmentally. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the reasons is because when a child suffers some sort of trauma in terms of abuse or neglect, development sometimes halts. So you might get a 10-year-old placed for you for example, that might be acting more like a 4-year-old. And so it could be that there was a trauma when that child was 4 and their development kind of halted or was arrested at that point. And so one of the things that you're expected to do is work with that child to try to catch up developmentally. And that might look like helping them with schoolwork. There are certain things that they'll go over with you about what you can do to help developmentally, depending on where your child, its place with you is. Third competency is supporting relationships between children and their families. And there, that emphasis on family again that I've already mentioned. I'll talk in a minute more about families, but supporting visitation, family time is one of the things that you'd be doing when you're meeting that competency. Fourth competency is connecting children to safe and nurturing relationships intended to last a lifetime. And there's that permanency, that I mentioned. And then working as a member of a professional team. And there we go, teamwork. Already we've mentioned permanency and teamwork. So those are the 5 competencies. And so these are the abilities and the knowledge that are required. And so in order to be approved, you have to demonstrate that you have mastered all 5 of these. And if you're not approved right away, then it could be that one of those competencies needs some more work. And so the agency can talk to you about what you can do in order to get up to speed on that competency for approval. And the other thing is, if your approval as a foster parent is ever suspended, it's because you no longer meet one of those competencies. And the agency would, of course, talk to you about that. But anyway, so throughout your training, those are the focus of those sessions, those 7 sessions that you'll have. Okay, so now we're ready to go on to the approval process. So after training, some agencies will do it a little differently. Some will wait until you're finished your training before they begin your approval process. Others will start during training to have some of those meetings with you. But the first thing to know about approval is that it's mutual. In other words, it's not just the agency assessing you, it's also you making a decision about whether or not becoming a foster parent is something that you can commit to. So you ask yourself, is this something I am prepared for? Is it something that I can do? And so you ask yourself, do you have the ability? In other words, have you mastered those competencies? And do I have the resources? And what I mean by resources is, do you have space in your home? Are you financially stable to provide for your family's needs? Do you have enough time in what is probably already a somewhat busy schedule? Do you have support from your family and friends? And do you have enough flexibility at work to be able to accommodate the needs of a child or another child in your home? The other thing that you ask is, do I have the willingness? Am I willing to take care of day to day a child that is somebody else's child that has experienced trauma, has experienced abuse and neglect? Okay, so there are a lot of standards that are required for your approval, and a lot of things that you have to do in order to get the approval completed. And so I've listed a few things on the right hand there of the screen, but one of the things is background checks. And that's required of all adult household members. So that background checks consist of being fingerprinted for a national criminal record check. You have to complete child abuse neglect screenings to see if you have any founded reports of child abuse and child neglect. You have to read and sign a sworn statement or affirmation, which asks you about criminal record and child abuse neglect record, and whether or not there are any convictions or founded reports, and whether or not there's anything pending for any of those things. And that is, the purpose of that is in case there's something that is pending and hasn't been logged into a system yet, then it covers that in case the record checks don't demonstrate it. You have to submit a DMV record check for your driving. And so the standard for that is that it's that your driving record is satisfactory, and it's kind of considered in concert with all the other information. So for instance, if I was doing your approval and I saw that you had 20 speeding tickets, then I might say, can you keep the child safe while you have them in the car? And so it's not, if you don't have the greatest driving record, it's not a be all and end all, but it might be something that we might suggest you take a defensive driving course in order to satisfy that standard. You have to do physical examinations, and the point of those is just to demonstrate that you're in good health and that you're capable of caring for a child that's in your care. And all household members also have to have TB screenings. Okay, some of the general requirements for approval: you complete an application, you have to be 18. The Virginia approves individuals or married couples. So if you're a cohabitating couple, not married, then what they do is they approve one person as the provider, as a foster parent, and the other person is then part of the approval process, but listed as an adult household member. And in that situation, we suggest that both partners complete the training and complete the mutual family assessment, and then just one that was listed as the foster parent. The other thing is you have to be a U.S. citizen or a qualified alien. You have to have legal status in the United States in order to be a foster parent. And so the two things that the agency completes for your approval, one is called the Mutual Family Assessment Report. And that's a narrative report of a lot of the information that they collect from you. And then the physical home environment checklist. And those together will be your approval, your home study. And so for the mutual family assessment and for the physical home environment report, there are 3 face-to-face visits that the agency has to have with you. And if you're two people in the household, 2 adults in the household, then you have to have at least one joint interview. Um, there has to be at least one visit to the home, and there has to be an interview with all household members, including children. And during the interviews, the worker will observe interactions with family members, between family members. They'll examine your expectations of children that are in foster care, talk about your personal histories. They'll try to ascertain what your attitude is and about connections between children and their biological families. They'll get information on your education, on your careers, on your work schedule. We get financial information from you to make sure that you can provide for your family. And then there's lots of paperwork, as you might expect. And so there's some agreements that you have to sign, that you're asked to sign. One is a discipline agreement that talks about the prohibition of corporal punishment. And I looked at that because it's changed a lot since I retired. And there's a lot more in there that you have to initial and read. And so it's a much more complicated form to complete than it used to be a few years back. There's a confidentiality agreement that you're asked to sign because it's expected that you would keep a biological family's information confidential. There's something called the Foster Parent Bill of Rights that talks about what your rights are as a foster parent. It talks about how you would grieve, lodge grievances, and that you certainly keep a copy of that, and that goes into your file. And then there's a foster care placement agreement. It's called the Code of Ethics and Mutual Responsibilities. And there's an adoptive home placement agreement. And those, we go over those with you in training, but you also just review those because those aren't signed until a child is actually placed in your home for either adoption or foster care. There's an examination of your physical home. And so there's a lot of standards with that. One is about space. So you have to have space and furnishings for each child. You have to have a place for them to store clothing and belongings. You have to have accessible basin and toilet facilities, space for recreational activities. Rooms have to be heated in winter, dry, and well ventilated. You have to have adequate lighting. In terms of sleeping space, there's some standards with that. So children over the age of 2 do not share a bed. Children over the age of 2 do not share a bedroom with an adult. Children of any age don't share a bed with an adult. And children of the opposite sex over 3 do not share a room. And then there's another one, children under the age of 7 are not permitted to sleep on the top bunk of a bunk bed. You're asked to do an emergency preparedness plan. So if there's an evacuation of your community or your neighborhood, then it asks you things like where you would go and what the contact information is for those folks. It asks fire safety. You have to have smoke detectors in your sleeping areas. Any weapons that you have in your home have to be locked, and ammunition has to be stored separately and also in a locked container or closet. Pets, we have to get your pet vaccinations, and you have to demonstrate that or indicate that pets are not a threat or a safety hazard to the children placed. Cleaning supplies and medications have to be stored and secured and separate from food, basic first aid supplies, drinking water, and you have to have 3 references, and at least one has to be from not somebody who you're related to. And I know that sounds like a lot, and it is, but what we do to make it a little bit easier, I hope they're still doing this, is they give you a checklist at the beginning of this process. And what I used to do is I kept a checklist and gave you a checklist. And I think Melissa can attest to this, that then you check off your checklist, I check off mine, and that's how we keep track of everything that we need.
Yep.
So, and your approval is for 36 months. Sorry. Okay, we can go to the next slide. All right. Okay, so we're going to talk some about biological parents. And So one complete session of your training is devoted to working with biological families. And during that session, you're going to be introduced to a concept referred to as shared parenting. And just briefly, the idea behind that is that parenting of foster children is divided in three ways. So there's the agency and the courts who hold legal custody of children that are placed in foster care. And then there are foster parents who do the day-to-day parenting of the children. And then there are biological parents who still have rights up until the time that you might get to TPR, or termination of parental rights. Another thing that you'll be introduced to is something called bridging the gap. And bridging the gap is a concept that illustrates relationships between foster families and biological families, and how the gap between those families could be bridged. So it's kind of illustrated as a continuum of contact, and it can start out on the lower end with very simple things like not having direct contact, but maybe having pictures of biological parents in the room that the child sleeps in, including those parents in prayers, sending artwork and pictures or schoolwork to visits that the child has with their biological family, and just speaking positively and openly about biological family to the child in home. And then it can progress to other things that involve a little more direct contact. So it might progress to you actually meeting the parents. There's always an opportunity when if you're bringing children for visits, to have a chat with the biological family about how the child's doing, asking them questions or asking them for advice, talking with them about just how things are going in all areas. And I will comment on this one thing, and that is, when you ask them advice, that sends a message to them that you value their relationship with their child, and that they're contributing, and that you acknowledge that relationship is important. So even just asking a simple thing like, what's their favorite food, or what's their favorite, thing to do, or is there a tradition that we could continue that's important? That's very valuable, and makes a huge difference if you can do things like that. And so that kind of contact might progress to more frequent contact, which would be to inviting them to come to doctor's visits, school performances, soccer games, whatever that is your foster child is doing. And it might progress even further to things like, if the child returns home, then you might be, provide respite every now and then for the biological family. So, involve even more. You might mentor the family if that's appropriate. You might help with transportation if that's needed. So it can progress to more direct contact with the biological family. And then another one of the topics during that session is referred to as family time, and that's the visits between the foster child and the biological family. And what we know about family time or visitation is that it's one of the most critical factors affecting permanency outcomes for children that are in foster care. Family time is meant to be healing, and it begins as soon as possible after the child is placed in a foster care placement or separated from their family. And it's based on that belief that children have a right to see their families, and families have a right to maintain relationships and see their children. And so there are goals or things that are accomplished for all three sets of parents in that family time. And so for the children and the parents, the biological parents, it's an opportunity to make sure that they're okay, that they're not forgotten, and that to have that time and to give those messages to each other. So it's very healing in that, especially the first few visits after the separation. For foster parents, it's an opportunity to get to get to know more about a child's background and about their family culture. And for the agency, it's a way to learn what services and supports are needed, and also what progress that families are making on their goals. And you'll spend a lot of more time on that during the training. Okay. All right, moving right into adoption. So I think I told Stacia and Melissa that we could spend, and they know this to be true, we could spend an entire training session or more on just adoption itself. And we might put that together at some point.
Okay.
But
and just,
adoption,
just kind of looking, we are coming up to about almost on 7:45. So
okay.
I know you still have
All
a
right.
lot to say, so I just wanted to kind of give you a
okay, maybe I paced myself a little too slowly. Sorry. Okay, so we can offer an entire session. Let me just say that it's very common for foster families to adopt their foster children, but it's only after that reunification effort is made. It's kind of rare that agencies are approving families just for adoption. Normally, you're approved for foster care first, and then you move to that adoption approval because the foster child that you have is needing that to be that permanency. Okay, go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, lots of support for foster parents, the training and ongoing training, the monthly maintenance payments. There are stipends that you're given. The agency can offer childcare. It can offer respite care if you have a very difficult placement. You have a caseworker that is assigned to your child, and you're expected to have regular communication. Caseworker makes visits throughout the month, throughout the year. And so there are a lot of supports that you're offered. And don't forget to ask for things that you need. I think don't feel like that you can't ask because you can. Okay, go to the next slide. All right, so this is my last thing to tell you. Okay, so what agencies need in foster parents? What we're looking for is we're looking for individuals and families who can keep children safe. We're looking for individuals and families who can help children work through their trauma experiences and can heal. Somebody that can fill up their cups and nurture them and provide them positive experiences so they can reach their full potential. We're looking for families who can be non-judgmental and honor their biological families no matter what the history. We're looking for people who can be part of a team that works toward permanency for children while sharing the parenting responsibility. And we're looking for families that can provide them with a permanent home in the event they can't be returned to their biological family. And so just to close, I'll say you have to be able to keep an open mind about biological families. Children come to you with those families. The parents are experts on their children, even if their parenting has not been expertly done. And so you have to remember to ask them what happened to you rather than what's wrong with you, because that's the basis of being trauma informed. Sorry that I took up so much time.
Oh, you had so much great information. We really appreciate that. And that was great. So we probably don't have that many questions because you did such a good job going over everything. Before as we were registering people, we asked them if they had any questions. So we did have a question that says, how varied from foster care in DC and Maryland compared to Virginia's foster care system?
I'm sure there are differences. I'm not entirely familiar with DC, Maryland, the systems, the foster care systems. Some of those are state administrated, some are locally administered. So that will impact it. But I will tell you this, there are lots of federal regulations about foster care. And so every state across the country will have a good many similarities just because of those federal regulations, because those are all tied to funding. And so states, want to make sure that they get funding for their foster care programs. So all states have to adhere to those federal guidelines. So for instance, all states require foster parents to be trained. All states require background checks on foster parents. So it really, and then there are a lot of individual, things that vary from state to state. But generally speaking, there are probably more similarities than there are differences in those programs.
Right. So we also had a question this weekend when we were at a conference, and somebody wanted to know, as a working parent, what resources are available as far as childcare, but especially if you have a foster child who might have some behavior or some special needs. How can the agencies help with childcare for them?
So childcare is available for any working parent. Respite care is also available for children with those greater needs if the foster parent needs a break. And I've also seen childcare be offered for children that have those special needs, and it helps the foster parent day to day to have some of that childcare. So it kind of operates as a respite, but yes, especially for working parents, childcare is offered, and you have to use, approved daycare providers, childcare providers,
Yeah.
in order for the agency to fund it.
All right. All right, let's see. Another question is, do we have to use the county's Department of Social Services, or can we use a private agency?
Either one. You can use the county or you can use a private agency as well. And there's some differences in those two, but always training, always background checks. The approval process is similar. Probably the therapeutic agencies or private agencies are the ones that can provide a little bit more support if you're interested in taking children with higher needs. If the local agency has no resources, families that they can match well for those children with higher needs, then they go to the therapeutic agencies to see if there are homes available. And so with a placement with a therapeutic agency, then the therapeutic agency provides additional training to the families and additional support to the families for children that have higher needs.
All right, great. And then the last question, then we can turn to see if anybody wants to get off mute and ask the question that's on, is what should prospective foster parents think about when considering a sibling group? And I can answer that question also as far as being a former foster parent. Obviously, the more children you have, the more chaos you have. But also, in some ways, it was very nice to have children that were siblings because they had each other, and they had someone to play with. They had somebody to who's kind of experienced the same kind of things. They had, being taken from their parents was already so difficult. To at least have their siblings with them definitely helped with some of that. So just, I found it to be a positive thing as far as having siblings. Is there anything else that people should consider, Shawn, when looking at adding a sibling group instead of just a single foster child?
Just the additional requirements, associated with that. I mean, 2 children rather than 1. So more laundry, more, help with homework, more, maybe more appointments, depending on what the children are into, more activities. So it just adds a little bit to your, to what you're already doing.
Okay. All right. So I think at this point, I think we're going to turn off the recording, and then if anybody wants to unmute and ask questions, we'll be happy to answer those for you.